It was a cold winter morning. 3 little girls knocked on an old man's door, holding a kitten in their hands. "Our mom is very sick," they said, and in that moment, the man had to face his past. What was the truth? What had he lost? And most of all, why did they feel so familiar? By the way, we noticed something small. Most people who watch these stories aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Maybe we get caught up in the moment or just forget to hit the button. But your support truly helps us keep creating stories like this. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. The wind was hitting the creaky shutters of the old cabin as if asking, "Are you still here, Henry?" The only answer came from the dying fire in the fireplace inside. A faint crackle, the steam from a half-finished pot of stew, and the vague memory of a woman who once laughed beside the stove. Henry Bauman sat on the bench, wrapped in a blanket fallen over his knees, holding an old wooden spoon, half-carved. His fingers could barely move anymore, but his memory unfortunately was still sharp and aching. The inside of the cabin was filled with sounds swallowed by time. It wasn't just the wind pressing against the door tonight, so was the past. Outside, a snowstorm. Inside, memories that hadn't been spoken in years. His loyal dog Max was curled up near the fire, sleeping without even twitching an ear. Time seemed frozen, just like it had when those letters stopped coming, until someone knocked on the door. The first knock was light. Max only twitched his ear. The second was clearer. The third came with certainty. When Henry stood up, his knees resisted stubbornly. He didn't even bend down to grab his cane as he walked to the door. He just walked like answering this knock was some instinctive duty. When he opened the door, there were 3 children standing on the snow-covered porch. 3 girls, shivering from the cold, their dresses soaked and frozen at the hems. The youngest held a yellowish shawl in her hands, and inside it, something tiny stirred. A kitten, pure white, like cotton. The oldest one must have been around 12. She looked up, and their eyes met. In that moment, Henry felt something stir in his chest that had been silent for years. The girl's voice was weaker than a whisper, but as clear as the snow. "Sir, would you buy our kitten? Our mom is very sick." Henry couldn't speak for a second. It was like the icy air had filled his lungs instead of his mouth. Then he stepped back and opened the door wide. "Come in," he said simply. "What's her name?" Henry asked, his voice raspy from years of silence. The youngest looked up. The girls hesitated, then stepped inside. Max lifted his head not to growl, but to wag his tail. Henry pointed to the old bench near the fireplace. The 3 of them sat down side by side, as if something might fall apart if they separated. Henry slowly stirred a pot of soup, poured it into wooden bowls. The middle girl took hers with both hands and nodded in thanks. The others drank quietly. The kitten curled into the youngest girl's chest, purring softly. It was so delicate, it looked like it didn't even have the energy to warm itself with its own breath. "Luna. She was born when it snowed. Mom said she would bring us luck." Henry looked away. Something inside him cracked. The silence he had built like a wall over the years had begun to crumble. Just then, the oldest girl slowly set her spoon into the bowl. "We don't want to bother you. We can go. We were just looking for someone who might help. We won't stay long," she said, then lowered her eyes. She was proud, scared, but not begging. "How far did you walk?" Henry asked. "We crossed 2 rivers. Walked past the swamp. From the stone house on the hill. Mom can't walk anymore. She's lying down. But she said someone would come. That someone out there still had a roof and a bowl of soup and some warmth." A familiar name echoed in Henry's chest. And then it happened. He looked at each of their faces. The shape of their lips, the set of their eyes, the lines of their chins. They all reminded him of someone. A woman he thought he had lost, who had always been hidden behind lies. Amelia. There was something of her in these girls. And then one more thing. After drinking the soup, the youngest bent down, clutched Luna tighter to her shawl, and murmured sleepily, "Daddy." Henry's hands froze in midair. That word changed the entire air in the room. What rose in his throat wasn't guilt, wasn't anger. It was more like that one feeling in life that only comes once. The confirmation of something unspoken, but always known. And that night, the air inside the cabin changed. Loneliness was left to dry next to 3 pairs of wet boots. Silence was broken by the soft clinking of 3 little spoons against wooden bowls. And Luna's purring sounded like a song Henry thought he'd never hear again. As night slowly settled onto the roof of the cabin, the air inside was heavy, but somehow different. Max was curled up at the girls' feet, as if he had known them for years and was now standing guard. The fire crackled, but this time the sparks carried more than loneliness, they carried signs of life. Henry sat in the corner of the room on a wooden chair, watching them without blinking. In each of them, he saw the shadow of Amelia. Each one was like living proof of a past that had once been ignored and buried. And when the smallest one mumbled that word again in her sleep, "Daddy," Henry felt like he might finally speak against the inner silence he had kept for so many years. But something still held him back. A possibility. A fear. What if he was wrong? He didn't sleep a wink until dawn. The girls slept without moving. Luna, nestled on the youngest girl's chest, had one tiny paw resting against her cheek, purring softly. Henry quietly moved toward the shelves. He lifted the lid of a box covered in dust. Inside was an old notebook. It was full of Amelia's handwriting recipes, sketches, even a poem. Between the pages was a photo, a young woman with a scarf wrapped around her head, looking at Henry with hope in her eyes. On the back, it read, "If one day you can't find me, follow the wind. I always turn to the east." He traced the letters with his finger, then closed the notebook. Early in the morning, while the girls were still asleep, Henry stepped outside. The sharp cold filled his lungs as snow crunched under his boots. He brought out the old sled carriage from the barn. He hitched up the horses. Even the horses seemed to notice how rarely he went out. They got skittish at first. He calmed them down with a handful of feed. When he returned, June, the oldest girl, was standing in the doorway waiting. Her eyes were questioning, but her voice was gentle. "Are you going somewhere?" Henry didn't look away. "Yes, there's something I need to find out." June hesitated, then nodded. "If you have to go, we just want to know you'll come back." And for the first time, the sentence that had been rising in his throat finally came out. "I will come back. I promise." And so he left, through the forest, down the old path, tracing the steps of a past long buried. With each turn, the trees whispered memories. He and Amelia had walked here when they were young. Their first kiss was here, their first fight. And now, after all the years covered in snow, Henry was back, this time chasing an answer. After 2 hours, he arrived at the old cabin behind the town. The door was slightly open. The place was quiet, but not abandoned. When he stepped inside, he saw a weak coal fire still burning. On a small bed, wrapped in blankets, lay a woman. Her blonde hair had thinned. Her face was pale, but her eyes were open. When she saw him, she tried to sit up, but didn't have the strength. She spoke in a whisper. "Henry Bauman, are you really still alive?" Henry stepped closer and looked at her face. Tired, but still the woman he once knew. "Amelia," he said. "Why? Why didn't you ever say anything?" Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I tried, but your mother, she burned my letters. When I tried to send a second one, she threatened me. She said, 'Those children can't be his.' And even if they were, Henry doesn't deserve to know." Henry's knees gave out. His heart was burning even in that cold. "But why did you leave?" "I didn't. I was thrown out. When they found out I was sick, they kicked me out of the house. After I gave birth to the girls, I had nowhere to go. I came to this cabin because it was the only place left. I tried to reach you, but they stopped me." Henry put his head in his hands. "I hated myself for forgetting you. I thought you had left me, that I had no daughters." Amelia reached out her hand. Her skin was cold, but her touch still held a warmth he remembered. "Henry, they're yours. Every one of them." What broke inside Henry in that moment wasn't just years of regret. It was also the birth of new hope. Before heading back with the sled, he wrapped Amelia in a thick blanket. "I'm taking you home," he said, "to your real home." As he returned, Max started barking in front of the house. June, May, and little Clara, yes, he knew their names now, had appeared on the porch. All of them kept their eyes on the sled. Clara held Luna tightly. When Henry stopped the carriage, the smallest girl ran up. "Mom." As tears rolled down Amelia's cheeks, she hugged Clara around the neck. In that moment, the years built on lies collapsed, and a peace as soft yet powerful as snow fell over the truth. Henry knelt beside the sled. Looking at the 3 girls, he said, "You're not going anywhere now. None of you." But inside, there was still one knot left to untie. Because the past doesn't forgive so easily. And even though Henry's silence had begun to unravel, The town and some of the people in it weren't yet ready to accept the truth. When Amelia was laid in the bed, the air inside the cabin shifted again. This time, it wasn't heavy with pain but with a calmness that comes when burdens are finally being lifted. Henry had placed her in his own bed, the only real bed in the house. The three girls gathered around her, dabbing water on her face with a cloth, brushing her hair. Clara had tucked Luna under the covers, as if the kitten's presence might somehow support their mother's breathing. May silently fed wood into the stove, watching her mom from the corner of her eye. June was mixing the last few dried herbs from an old jar, moving swiftly as if taking on an unspoken duty. Henry stood in the doorway, staring at the falling snow. He was turning a piece of wood over and over in his hand, not knowing where to put it. He had learned that his mother once made a decision for his life, and that decision had left 3 small lives growing up in the dark. He had lied to himself, living with the belief that Amelia left me, without realizing that the one who'd been left behind wasn't him but the woman he loved. But now, there was no going back. And the issue wasn't just his conscience. The town had started moving, too. The next day, Henry got on his horse and rode to town. He needed to get medicine for Amelia and supplies for the girls. But every door slammed in his face. Every pair of eyes that avoided his reminded him. The past hadn't been forgiven worse. It hadn't even been understood. The town hadn't changed, but Henry had, and that difference could no longer avoid conflict. At the small store in town, Mr. Alcott, once considered an old friend, looked over his glasses. "You came back with 3 kids, Henry. Are they really Amelia's?" "Yes," Henry said, not looking away. "What do the marriage records say?" the man asked, leaning between shelves that smelled like paper. "Do you have anything proving you're their father?" Henry bit his lip. "No records. But just look at their faces." The man lowered his gaze and quietly placed a bag of tea into the basket. "People are talking about you, Henry. Some say those kids are the fruit of sin. Some think you should put them in an orphanage." That was the moment Henry realized some battles aren't fought with fists, but with silence. But his silence was over now. On the way back, the sled carried sacks of flour, sugar, soap, and 3 small pairs of gloves. But the heaviest load was in his mind, the town's quiet judgment. And it wasn't aimed just at him, it was aimed at 3 little girls too. The next morning, when the wooden door of the cabin creaked open, there was a note left behind. "Those who protect sinners become part of the sin." Underneath, a faint cross had been drawn. Henry crumpled the note and threw it in the stove, but the fire in his chest was fueled not by wood but by memories. From that day on, the silence in the cabin was broken not just by the sound of snow. Whispers from outside, curious glances, the intentional silence of passers-by, all of it formed an invisible but sharp boundary around Henry and the girls. June was the first to notice. "They're afraid of us in town," she said one day while chopping wood. "No," Henry replied. "They're not afraid of you. They're afraid they'll feel ashamed when they finally understand." And maybe that's why Henry made a decision. That day, he started building a platform right next to the cabin using old lumber. Max hovered at his feet. The girls asked questions, but Henry didn't say a word. With every hammer strike, he opened a new crack in the wall of silence. Inside, Amelia was still weak. Her coughing sometimes echoed through the cabin in the middle of the night. But her eyes sparkled a little more each time Henry drove a nail. She knew something was happening. When the platform was finished, Henry placed 3 small stools on it. Then he made a sign for each one. No names, just one word each. Brave, chosen, true. The next morning, there was another knock at the door. But this time, it wasn't 3 little girls. It was a town official, a priest, and someone Henry didn't know, a representative from the town judge. They held an official document. Sealed. Cold. Indifferent. "These children cannot remain here unless you can prove they're yours." Henry stood firm in the doorway. He looked up, opened his mouth. "Proof," he said. "Then come. See the things that leave no marks. Because some truths aren't written on paper, they're written on the heart." But this time, words wouldn't be enough. The town wanted to decide. This house would either become a mark of sin from the past or a shelter for the future. And Henry now knew exactly what was worth fighting for. There was no wind that night in the cabin, but the air felt strangely heavy, as if the storm was about to break inside. Amelia was sitting up halfway in bed. Her coughing fits had become less frequent but deeper. When Henry sat beside her, her eyes were open, but she was staring off into the distance. She wanted to say something, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. "Have you forgiven me?" Henry asked, his voice carrying a real fragility for the first time. Amelia turned her eyes to him and gave a soft smile, worn and frameless. "I never blamed you, Henry. I allowed them to silence you. When they tore us apart, I may not have built the wall that kept you from looking for me, but I didn't tear it down either. When they took you," Henry said, his voice rough, "my mother told me she was saving my pride. But all I was left with was silence. And now, it's you all paying the price for it." Amelia took his hand. "No, Henry, you're speaking now. The real silence only begins when they come knocking at the door." And they did come knocking the very next morning. Two officials bearing the seal of the state, a priest, and Henry's former father-in-law dressed in a gray suit, face like stone. Beside him, Amelia's mother still holding her nose high, her face empty but for pure stubbornness. They had documents in their hands. But more than anything, they carried judgment. "Henry Bauman," the man said, "these 3 children are not officially yours. There's no marriage certificate, no birth records, nothing. Their custody will be revoked and they'll be placed under state care." Amelia called from inside. "You left me to die? You hid my children and sentenced us to rot in silence. And now you dare to show your face?" The woman tried to step inside, but Henry blocked her. "No," he said, "you'll never cross this threshold again. Not with the law, not with scripture. Because this home is sanctified not by paper but by what's been lived here." The priest stepped forward politely. "Mr. Bauman, resistance won't help anyone. We have to consider what's best for the children." That's when June spoke for the first time. She stepped in front of the door, squared her shoulders. "We are in the best place. If you can't see that, that's your failure, not ours." May came next, holding a drawing she had made. A charcoal sketch of 5 figures. A cabin, a man, a mother, and 3 girls. In that moment, the paper in her hand felt more true than any legal document. Clara just held Luna tighter. Her eyes were full, but she didn't cry. She resisted with silence. Henry turned back inside, reached for a frame on the shelf. He pulled out an old letter. One of Amelia's, never sent. Its date and handwriting clearly visible. It read, "If this letter reaches you, find me and our daughters. We'll be waiting. Here's your document," Henry said. From the heart, from a mother, from real life. But still, it wasn't enough. The officials said they would return at first light to take the children. That night, the cabin was filled with the kind of silence that comes before war. No one slept. Amelia stroked her children's hair. "Remember everything tonight," she said. "Because truth doesn't fade, not even before dawn." Henry stepped out alone onto the porch. Max lay at his feet, eyes wide open like snow. The wind was soft, but the cold wasn't coming from outside, it came from within. That's when he made his decision. Before dawn, he rode into town. He visited old neighbors one by one, carrying bags of supplies. To some, he gave bread. To others, gloves. And then, a letter. Each one, handwritten. "Come tomorrow and listen. Because this time, we won't stay silent." And just as the snow-covered ground saw its first footprints, Henry stepped onto the platform beside the cabin. June, May, and Clara stood behind him. Amelia watched from the window, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Max waited on the porch. The first to arrive was the town doctor, then the woman from the bakery, then Farmer Davis, and soon, nearly the whole town. Quiet, but present. Not out of curiosity, maybe out of shame. When Henry began to speak, his voice wasn't loud or angry. It was steady, certain. "These girls are mine. Because when I met them, I began building a future out of the broken pieces of the past. You want proof? Here it is. I wake up every morning and I'm still here. I light the fire every night. I pour every drop of medicine. I shed every tear." Then he looked at the priest. "You pray? I keep them alive." The crowd was silent. But this time, it wasn't awkward. It wasn't tense. This time, it was understanding. And before the officials could even arrive, the townspeople did something. They stood in front of Henry's house. With their backs to the door, they became a wall. Steady, unmoving. When the officials finally arrived, they were too late. And for the first time, Henry was speaking not just with his past but with his people. The sky was gray, but it no longer threatened now, it only waited. Just like the crowd gathered around the cabin. They stood in front of Henry's home, some with their hats in hand, some with their hands in their pockets, but all quietly present. From the outside, it looked like they were simply waiting. But in truth, this was a transformation happening silently. People who had whispered for years were now taking sides without saying a word. The officials got off their horses. One of them pulled out the legal documents from his pocket. Legal action will be taken. These children have no records. Not in school, not in the church, not in any government registry. They dash, Henry cut in. So because they don't have names on a paper, they don't have lives? Just because they weren't enrolled in school, you think they didn't learn? Or because their names aren't in the prayer book, you think God didn't hear them? At that moment, June stepped up onto the platform. In her hands was a worn piece of fabric. On it, written in charcoal, was a single word: family. "We're not official," she said, her voice clear as the wind. "But we're real." A murmur came from the crowd, followed by a firm voice. The town's elderly doctor stepped forward. "I know these children. The youngest, Clara, I treated her last winter when she twisted her ankle. The middle one, May, taught me how to light the stove in my bakery. The oldest, June, helped me fix my fence twice. You say they don't exist, but they're one of us. Maybe even more than us." The officials hesitated. They were used to enforcing the law but not facing conscience. The fragile silence of the moment was broken by a sudden scream from Clara. "No," she cried. "I don't want to go. My mom is sick. You won't even let me take Luna, will you?" All eyes turned to Clara. Henry dropped to his knees and hugged her. Clara's hands were clenched tight, her fingernails digging into Henry's coat, her breath sharp and panicked. "No one's taking you," Henry said in a soft but steady voice. "No one's ever going to leave you alone again." In that moment, the official was seen putting the document back into his pocket. Avoiding everyone's eyes, he simply said, "Under these conditions, we can't proceed. But this will be reported." They got on their horses and rode off. The townspeople slowly began to disperse, but no one was angry. On the contrary, there was a strange lightness on their faces, a kind of shame. Because those who had only watched for years had now for the first time, perhaps stood behind what was right. That night, there was a quiet joy in the home. There was no laughter, no shouting, but the crackle of the stove, Luna's purring, and the girls slowly leaning into each other. That night, everything felt like it belonged. Henry sat beside Amelia's bed. Her eyes were open, but she was so tired. Each breath seemed to pass through the shadows of the past and reach into the present. "It's over," Amelia said, her voice misty. "Let them forget us. That's enough." "No," said Henry. "They shouldn't forget, because forgetting is the fastest way to repeat." The next morning, Henry decided to show the girls something in the empty space beside the house. He hammered 3 small wooden stakes into the ground. On each one, he hung a sign. This time, the words were different. June, not the strongest, but the first to stand. May, not the quietest, but the deepest thinker. Clara, not the smallest, but the one who carries light. The girls didn't know what to do at first. Then, one by one, they hugged Henry. And this hug wasn't just a thank you. It was a new knot tying together the broken pieces of the past, a new beginning. But that evening, Amelia's cough grew harsher. Her face paled, her hands trembled. When May placed a cloth on her forehead, Henry noticed a tear run down her cheek. And at that moment, he knew this peace was only temporary. Time was moving forward again, and it wouldn't be kind. That night, after everyone had fallen asleep, Henry quietly opened his notebook. He wrote names for pages. No birth dates, no official seals. But for the first time, a father wrote down the names of his children. This was his record. The greatest truth lived in the unseen corners of the world. A man, finally, claiming the family he almost lost. And outside, every snowflake that landed no longer stood for silence but for acceptance. It was one of those dull February mornings. The sky wasn't snowy or clear, just gray, as if even the sky didn't know how to feel. The stove in the cabin was still burning. Luna sat on the windowsill, her head resting on her paw. Max was lying on the porch, waiting silently as always. But inside, something was different. Amelia's breathing had grown thin. Her eyelids trembled, but her gaze remained clear. In bed, under the quilt, one hand was in Henry's, the other held by June. May was in the corner, whispering something like a small prayer. Clara had wrapped Luna around her neck and was silently watching her mother's eyes. "Henry," Amelia said, Her lips cracked, her voice barely a whisper of steam. I've seen their future. I know, they won't be alone. Henry bowed his head. Tears slid from his eyes, but he didn't cry. He couldn't cry, because this ending wasn't a loss, it was a completion. Forgive me, he whispered. Amelia smiled. You were never someone who needed forgiving. You just forgot how to wait. Now you remember. And that's enough. There was a pause then. No storm, no crackling fire. Just a deep, meaningful stillness. And then, Amelia's breath stopped. Her eyes slowly closed. What slipped from her hand wasn't life but weight. June turned her head. May closed her eyes. Clara leaned her forehead against Luna and simply said, Mom, as if understanding the word for the first time with care. Henry kissed the woman's hand, then slowly straightened the blanket, added another log to the stove. The house didn't smell like death in that moment. Instead, it felt like it was standing at the very center of life. Because Amelia had left behind something no one should ever forget. Roots grow not just in blood, but in devotion. That day, the townspeople gathered again, this time to say goodbye. Next to the platform, a simple casket covered in white cloth was placed. On it was a drawing May's sketch of a family of 5, a cabin in the background, a dog and a cat. Beneath it, written in small letters, she told us stories. We gave her life. For the first time, the town schoolteacher spoke. These girls will be enrolled in our school. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Because this is their home now. Then an old farmer stepped forward with soil in his hands. For the next season, but seeds should go to those who already planted. The baker left a basket of bread. Amelia was always the warm bread kind of person. We baked it from her recipe. And the Reverend stayed silent. He bowed his head, then stepped close to Henry and whispered a single sentence. I thought I was speaking in God's name, but you stayed quiet in the name of life. Your silence humbled us. That night, the sky finally cleared. The stars didn't show, but the wind softened. Clara fell asleep in Henry's lap. June was writing in the notebook. May opened the window. The cold came in, but her face was warm. You know, Henry said softly. Your mother once told me, family isn't just a last name, it's the people you look at every morning. June looked up. Can we take your last name? Henry paused for a moment. Then, letting his eyes fill with tears, simply said, You already have. A few days later, a letter was sent to town. Inside were 3 birth records, Amelia's note, a statement from the town doctor, and the teacher's signature. Written across the top, we're no longer unregistered. Now we have names. And we live not just in a house, but in a family. And on the cabin wall, Henry hung a carving he had made with his own hands. Those who stayed were stronger than those who left. And those who were never named left the deepest marks. The Yindi were just a few steps away from reaching our first 1,500 subscribers, our growing family. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you to everyone who's brought us this far. With your support, we grow stronger with every story. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time.